Thank you.
I think it's important to understand that there's one bad guy in all this, and it's Hamas. And that's what I've said repeatedly. I've watched European countries put so much pressure on Israel because they don't like the way they're prosecuting the war. Whether people like the way they're prosecuting the war, it is their war. They dumped an enormous amount of humanitarian aid and food in prior to the blockade. That would have been more than enough to feed them throughout the blockade. But the problem was that Hamas was stealing the food. One of the reasons that Israel stopped the just almost unlimited supply of food going in was because Hamas was profiting off of it. They made $500 million last year selling it. And one of the things that was so outrageous was because they would steal the food. By the UN's own numbers, about 88 to 89% of the food going in has been stolen or looted. So that means that the people weren't getting the food. And I'll tell you who else wasn't getting the food. The hostages. I know you saw the video of the hostages a week ago when Hamas posted this hideous, disgusting video of hostages being tortured, being starved, and being forced to dig their own graves. They're not getting any of that food. So the problem has come that all the pressure from European countries and even Canada has been focused on Israel rather than focused on Hamas. And what I said in the tweet, and I know you didn't like it that much, but I was having a little fun with it. The point being, the Arab League unanimously said it's Hamas that ought to disarm. It's Hamas that ought to give up and recognize that they have no future. And they need to let all of the hostages go, not dribbling out. They need to let them all go at one time. I think Israel is right to call for that. To be honest with you, you mentioned about the plan to take Gaza City. We don't know how that's going to go. It could go sideways. I think everybody understands there's no guarantee that it will go well. I do know firsthand that Israel has put offer after offer after offer on the table in negotiations trying to get some type of diplomatic settlement. But Hamas is not interested in that. And it was just a little over a week ago that the U.S. decided they're not serious and got up and walked away and said there's not going to be a negotiation that is going to result in the release of the hostages. Now, after Israel has said, okay, we're going to move in more militarily, take Gaza City, suddenly Hamas says, okay, maybe we should meet. We'll have some more discussions. So one has to wonder, are they really serious about ending this? Are they really serious about doing it in a way that President Trump was very clear about? Hamas can't stay, and Hamas has no future in governing Gaza. That's important because leaving Hamas, even a little bit, is like leaving the Nazis in Germany after World War II. And I don't think anybody thinks that's a good idea. I wish those same countries would recognize that by them calling out Israel specifically and barely mentioning not only Hamas, but not even mentioning the hostages, if at all, maybe slightly, what they have done is empowered Hamas. And I think you probably saw the interview that Secretary Rubio did over the weekend. And one of the things he pointed out was the moment that these European countries started calling for a Palestinian state, and when they started saying Israel needs to do things differently, Hamas walked away from all of the negotiations and discussions because in their minds, hey, they're winning. They're winning because the allies of Israel are spending more time attacking Israel and questioning the way they're doing things than they are in questioning Hamas. And I want to point out something I don't think most people have a clue about. Israel doesn't just go in and bomb the ever-loving bejesus out of Gaza. They send messages, leaflets, they give warnings to people, they tell them where they're going to hit, and they urge them, get out of this area. There's a rocket launcher there, there's a base there, there's a military structure there, and they're very specific, and they tell people to get out. Hamas takes its civilians and herds them to those very places that had been announced by the Israelis as a target. To be fair, I love my country, I serve my country, but my country, the United States, we don't tell adversaries where we're going to hit in advance of it. And Israel has done that consistently for as long as I can remember. Back in the previous Gaza war in 2012, 2014. And quite frankly, nobody ever says that's kind of a spectacular thing to do. Yes, there's a lot of people that shouldn't have been killed or injured, and they are. It is a tragedy. But the tragedy started on October the 7th. And I think this is one of those areas where apparently you and I do agree. It started with the raping of women in front of their children, the beheading and burning in ovens of babies, lighting elderly people on fire as they sat in their wheelchairs as their families were forced to watch it. And all of this, we know it happened, despite what some people deny. We know it happened because the Hamas terrorists, the savages, they videotaped it themselves because they were really proud of what they were doing. And they took it back and they showed it to their families and they showed it to the other people around them because they wanted them to see what they had done in the absolute heinous, unspeakable murder of innocent Jewish people who had done nothing to them. And they just woke up one Shabbat morning and here they come. And the horror that was unleashed upon them is equivalent to 40,000 Americans being slaughtered and massacred. And I wish more Americans put in that context that over 1,200 people murdered that morning is the equivalent of 40,000 Americans. And I promise you, if someone came and killed 40,000 Americans in one day, the difficulty would be to restrain Americans from wanting to do what Israel has been accused of, but absolutely has not done, and that's genocide. I've said this many times, Piers, if Israel is trying to commit genocide, they're really honestly bad at it, because they could have done genocide on October the 8th. We know they have the military capacity, but they haven't. They have tried to spare civilian life, tried to contain the collateral damage, but they don't get any credit for that, appreciation for that. Instead, they get condemned by the very people that ought to be their allies and that ought to understand that if the same thing happened, whether it was in France or Great Britain or Canada or the Netherlands, I assure you that the people of those nations would not say, gee, we just don't like the way that you're fighting those who did this to us.
However, when it comes to this idea that you're promoting there, that Israel has been restrained in the way it's gone about its response, I would take issue with that because, as you said, 1,200 people were killed that day. It was horrendous. But in response, Israel has now killed north of 60,000 people, including over 20,000 children.
Let me pause. Let me pause there. When you use the term 60,000, let's remember that that figure comes from the Gaza Health Ministry, which is Hamas. And we don't know if this is anywhere near accurate. Plus, it also includes the terrorists. It's not just civilians, not 60,000 civilians. We don't know how many it is. It could be 15,000, it could be 50, it could be 60, and 3/4 of those could be the terrorists. So those numbers are a little hard to validate because they do include the terrorists themselves. And I'm not sure that that's a casualty that most of us are going to lose any sleep over and weep over.
Well, no.
I would say that post October the 7th, their credibility is pretty poor. I remember when Israel was accused of bombing a hospital and killing a bunch of people, and that made all the headlines across the world, and Israel was vilified for it. Turns out it wasn't anything they shot. It was a Hamas rocket that went astray. That's what blew up in the hospital. Israel had nothing to do with it. So did those figures get counted in there? Here's the point I think we can agree on. We may argue about the numbers. Too many people have been killed in Gaza. Too many innocent civilians have been killed there. But I blame Hamas for their stubbornness. I blame them for putting their people in front of the targets, not even trying to protect them. In fact, trying to see that they did get killed because it's good for business for them. And that's what makes them the monsters they are. They're not protecting their innocent. They're putting their innocent in harm's way intentionally because they don't care if they get killed. And when I was in Gaza a little over a week ago and talked to Gazans inside, what I was really amazed by was they didn't hate the IDF, which I would have kind of thought they might. They loved America, which I was glad they did. But what really was interesting was that every single one of them said that they had had a family member who had been murdered by Hamas. They hated Hamas. They wanted nothing to do with them. They wanted them gone. They wanted them out of their sight, out of their country, out of their control, because every one of them had personally experienced heartache in their families because of what Hamas had done. Israel, like every other country I'm aware of, and certainly like the U.S. and the U.K. for that matter, have people in a variety of positions on the political spectrum. Israel is no different. It's a democracy. People are able to speak. They're able to say things that others will disagree with. It's one of the hallmarks of, frankly, a democracy, one of the hallmarks of liberty, something we celebrate that difference. We may not celebrate every point of view. I don't celebrate every point of view that I hear coming out of the mouths of American elected officials who are in Congress. But here's what I do know, and this is something that, of course, you're aware of as well. The Prime Minister has been very consistent, never indicating he wanted to go and move people into Gaza. He's been explicitly clear that what he would like to see is once it's controlled, once Hamas is gone, once that dust has settled, and there's a lot of dust, I can tell you from having just been there, he wants to see an international coalition that would include largely, and perhaps mostly, with the exception of the United States, Arab partners, people who would have a governing hand and a governing role for a matter of years until the whole place can be built back. That's what he has stated. So, yeah, there's going to be differences of opinion with the prime minister within his own government. That's kind of normal. It's what we have in America. Heck, we've got some Republicans in the Congress that don't always agree with President Trump, much to my chagrin, because I think that if they're going to be Republican, they ought to agree with the leader. And if they disagree, they ought to do it behind closed doors. I'll leave the Israelis to their own devices as to how they divvy up their opinions, because that's really not my job to jump in the middle of their business. But I will jump into the middle of ours and say it makes me uncomfortable sometimes when I hear people in the U.S. government who have views that I scratch my head and say, where'd they come up with that? So I can only speak to that. I'm the U.S. ambassador to Israel, not the Israeli ambassador to the U.S.
What do you say to those who believe that Netanyahu decided to go to war to destroy the people of Israel, to sacrifice hostages, soldiers, and the values of the country of Israel?
I think it's ludicrous. I've been with the Prime Minister almost as much as I have been with my own wife since I have arrived here as ambassador. And anyone who would say that the Prime Minister wants this war to continue, that he doesn't care what happens, I tell you it's nonsense. Most people know that his perhaps closest aide, Ron Dermer, his Minister of Strategic Affairs, they know him. He was the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. What they may not know is he has two sons fighting in Gaza right now. What they may not know is that the current ambassador of Israel to the United States, Ambassador Leiter, a wonderful human being and an incredible diplomat and statesman, one of his sons was killed in Gaza. There are many members of the senior cabinet of the Prime Minister who are right now in Gaza in combat. And for anyone to suggest that the Prime Minister is enjoying this, or indifferent to it, or that he's immune to the suffering. Over 700 IDF soldiers have died in Gaza trying to avenge what happened on October 7th. And I haven't been anywhere in this country where I didn't run into someone who had a son, a daughter, a niece, a nephew, a brother, sister, father, mother, who was not directly impacted either in death or with a severe injury. I mean, it's just something every day I see it. And every week I'm talking to hostage families, not only those from the United States. We still have 2 American hostages deceased, but their families want the remains back so they can give them a proper burial. Hamas won't let even the deceased hostages out. But I just have to strongly disagree and push back on the notion, and I know that's not your position, you're not stating it, but yes, I hear it here. I hear it many places. I can tell you that based on not only the conversations I have, but the reality of the number of people at the most senior levels of the Israeli government whose own children are dodging bullets in Gaza, it's nonsense to say that they want the war to go on and that they don't care.
I mean, that quote that I read you was from Inav Zangorka, who's the mother of hostage Matan Zangorka.
Look, I understand the hostage families have a grief I don't understand. I can't grasp it. I'm a parent. I've tried to put myself in their position, but I really can't. And I pray to God I never have to. The grief that they are enduring and continue to endure after 700 days of this, 22 straight months, is just beyond my capacity to even get my arms around. So I'm not going to pretend that I understand it. And sure, they have strong opinions. They want their kids back. Who wouldn't? And maybe they express it in ways that show a sense of outrage and frustration and exasperation. And I think we can all be sympathetic and not be critical of them because they have views that might be critical of the government. But one thing I hope we never forget is that because they live in Israel, they can be incredibly critical of the government. They can say the harshest things they want, and nobody will come to their home and shoot them in the head for doing it. And there are a lot of places in this neighborhood, in the Middle East, where if you were to say the things about the head of government that people say about this prime minister or about other people in the government, you wouldn't see breakfast tomorrow because you would never live to see another day. And that's another piece of this whole big picture that I wish more people, particularly those who are a part of Western civilization, who value freedom, who value the free speech that is, well, it's supposed to be a hallmark of democracy, although I think in some places we're losing it. But that's something we should accept and be grateful for, even if it makes us incredibly uncomfortable.
And the reason this matters so much is that if the IDF has deliberately targeted a group of journalists in Gaza City, and it turns out that that man, al-Sharif, was not a Hamas terrorist, then that would constitute a war crime.
I also would point, there are photos where this alleged journalist is hugging the head of Hamas and smiling and yucking it up for the cameras. There is evidence that indicates that he was an asset for Hamas. And if it's proven that he isn't, then that's a different calculation. But right now, the evidence points to the fact that he was. And why would someone pose as a journalist? I mean, I know why they would do it, but I think that's incredibly despicable if somebody is pretending to be just reporting the news, but is actually being a participant in the outcome. It's like if a referee at an American football game, instead of wearing the striped jersey of the referee, decides to put on a team jersey and actually root for one team over the other and aid and abet one team over the other. But the big difference is that in football, it's just a game, really doesn't matter. This matters. People are dying there every day. And anyone who helps Hamas, who is sympathetic to them, who aids and abets them, I can understand they would be a target.
But there is no actual hard evidence that he was a Hamas terrorist. The only evidence appears to be old pictures of him with Hamas leaders, of which there would be many people in Gaza who would do pictures of that nature with the governing body. This is prior to October the 7th. I think judging people as terrorists prior to October the 7th, when this was a government that was being financially supported by Israel, amongst others, to the tune of billions of dollars, is pretty disingenuous.
Well, I want to again say, I don't have the evidence that you seem to think you have regarding this guy's innocence. I don't know. If I have to take the word of the Israelis or Hamas, I'll be honest, I'm going to lean with the Israelis far quicker than I'm going to lean with Hamas. And I do know that I don't think that they would just go target a journalist just so they could take him out because they didn't like what he's saying. I think they're a much better country than that. They have a much better moral code than that, and I'm going to give them credit for that. If somebody can prove that they targeted the journalist who was a completely innocent guy, and all he was trying to do was objectively report the news, and he never had any association with Hamas. He really was not aiding and abetting them. He really did not have a relationship with them. He wasn't a part of them in some way. Then sure, let's investigate that. Let's bring that to the surface and hold people accountable. But we don't know that. And I think it's a little disingenuous for us to make the conclusion that this was just an innocent journalist when there's a lot of evidence to point to the fact that he was not quite so innocent when it comes to his relationship with Hamas, a bloodthirsty cult who could not even get enough of the blood on their hands October the 7th.
Final question for you, Ambassador. I'm about to interview a spokesman for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Now, according to the United Nations, 1,373 Palestinians have been killed since the 27th of May while seeking food. 859 of those died in the vicinity of GHF sites and 514 along the routes of food convoys. More than 170 charities and NGOs have called for the GHF to be shut down, including Oxfam and Save the Children. They say Israeli forces and armed groups routinely open fire on Palestinians seeking aid. MSF, also known as Doctors Without Borders, said the GHF locations have morphed into a laboratory of cruelty and become scenes of orchestrated killing. And there have been 212 deaths separately reported from malnutrition in Gaza, according to the Gaza Health Ministry that we've discussed earlier, including 98 children. So before I speak to the GHF spokesman, what do you say about this? I've seen your response about this before, that you've not seen independent evidence that these people were all killed by the IDF. But there is a growing sense that the IDF are routinely shooting towards these very large groups of obviously hungry people, otherwise they wouldn't be stampeding for food. And that again, if that is what they're doing, then that again is a war crime.
Well, first of all, I dispute the numbers because a lot of those have already been proven to be untrue. For example, a few Sundays ago, it's probably been maybe a month ago, early on in the GHF effort, which, by the way, is a U.S. effort. Those are special forces guys. Those are our guys. And it was set up because President Trump said, get the food in there to the people, but get it in a way that Hamas can't steal it, because they were stealing so much of it. And that left people hungry, and it also left them dependent upon buying it from Hamas. On that particular Sunday, they said 27 people had been killed at a GHF site. Well, it turns out we had video. Not only was no one killed, no one even got hurt. Nobody even stumbled over and broke an arm. It was utterly false, but front pages from the New York Times and the Washington Post and the BBC and CNN all ran with the story. And when it was proven that it was untrue, they all sort of did a Emily Latella and said, oh, never mind. And they put a little bitty disclaimer out. And some of them edited their stories a little bit. But I think when you talk to the GHF people, the ones who have been out there risking their lives to get food to people, they're going to give you a very different perspective. I was there. I watched what they did. I watched the way in which they did it. And I think it is a much better process, and it is work. People are not stealing those boxes of food that are designed to give a family of 5 food for 8 to 10 days. Over 115 million meals have already been served, and we're getting ready to scale up the operation to put more feeding sites. This is while the UN's process had 900 trucks parked in the sunshine with food rotting, and the pallets of food, thousands of pallets of food, enough for a year or more of food, sat there in the sun because the UN didn't feel good about the manner in which it was going to be delivered and taken into the country. When their own numbers indicate that 88% of what they take in gets stolen, I wouldn't be critical of the GHF. In fact, I think people ought to be grateful that they are getting the food to the people. And I'll say again, when I was at those feeding sites and when I talked to Gazans, I did not hear anything other than, we love America, we're glad you've done this, and this is the first time we're getting food that we didn't have to pay for. Why does Hamas hate GHF? One of the things they demanded in one of the negotiations just 2.5 weeks ago was that GHF had to be shut down. Why would Hamas want to shut it down? I'll tell you why. Because GHF method of getting food has really hurt their capacity to control the food market, and it's costing them money. Otherwise, they would say, sure, go ahead and bring the food in. All we care about is people getting to eat. But they don't care about people getting to eat. They care that they eat. And if you look at the people from Hamas, when they get photographed, they're well fed. None of them are hungry. I guarantee you, look at their faces, look at their bodies. And instead of food, they could use some Ozempic. But yeah, there's some real deprivation in that country, but it's not because GHF is killing people. What the people told me, it was Hamas that was shooting the folks coming to get the food, not only at the GHF sites, if they could get to them, but also at the UN sites. That's just a reality. I think you're going to hear it from the GHF representative when he talks to you.